Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Deep Thoughts. Today, I'm going to talk about the playground. And I love titles like these because your guys are like, what in the fuck is he going to be talking about? All right. One of the things that drives these episodes, as the folks that have seen dozens and dozens of these already know, is I'm always data mining the brain. Trying to find out what are we thinking about on a daily basis over and over and over again as a community that we don't acknowledge. We don't talk about it. We haven't even realized we do it, but we do it every single day. Maybe we do it 1,000 times a day. Maybe we do it a couple times a day. My entire life, as I deal with people and have dealt with people, I should say, invariably within a few minutes of judging their character, I'm comparing them to someone in the playground, one of the many playgrounds I was on as a child. You either have your totally cool people. I'm a guy, so for me it's the cool dude. He looks pretty good, got some pretty good genetics on him. He's taking care of his body. He's a nice dude. He could be really arrogant because he's so handsome and so smart, but he isn't. And then you got your nerdy girl, you got your glamour girl, you got your glamour arrogant girl, you got the girl that's going to be arrogant, but hasn't yet. You got the guys that, when you play soccer, even though you're only supposed to use your feet, we're punching each other in the head up above. And there's respect at the end of the game. You got some good looks in there. Oh yeah, you totally did. Then I guess there's the bully as well. We're not going to overemphasize on the bully, just so you know. This isn't about, headline news. But you also have your ball baby. He's a guy. He's a boy, technically. But you're all boys on the playground. And there's this relative sort of envelope, which we're going to get into, as to how you perceive the whole thing. But you got the kid who's not injured. He's upset. He's not getting his way. And he just wails like a little pussy constantly. Then you got the tomboy, the girl that could knock every guy out. She's hot as hell. Doesn't know it. Doesn't care. Never will care. I've got one of these in my family. So this episode is to say, okay, for those of you who are a real good judge of character, I want to ask you personally in the comments, do you think of the playground like I do? Because I do. I went to 7 different schools before I graduated high school. Now, in America, you typically go to 3. And, preschool, whatever. But you go through, kindergarten through 6th. When I was a kid, 7, 8, 9 in middle school, which we call junior high. And high school was 10, 11, 12. So I was supposed to go to 3. And I went to 4 extra ones because I moved around a lot. In moving around, you have different playgrounds, different kids, different cultures. You eventually meet different races if you move far enough away, which I was fortunate enough to do. The playground is a very interesting place because it has an innocence that we all lose, right? Such a shame. Such a shame. A lot of you, like me, will have the memory of a bunch of guys that got along in middle school. I mean, sling your arms around the guys, man. You just all hang out together, talk to the girls. They got their arms around the girls, and we're all planning on who's going to hook up with who later on and go steady. Who's going to kiss while everyone else watches. And then later on, you're like, oh, yeah, that guy, he fucking totally got into meth, blew his brains out. That guy went into the military, totally awesome. Maybe, one guy goes in, he's obnoxious. One guy comes out, he's great. One guy totally nailed it, dated the right girl, had a great family. He's got 5 kids, happy as could be, sits on a porch, fishes. Then you have the executive who comes to the reunion with, 5 electronic devices that he constantly rotates through, plus his little jaw tooth thing that he's using as Bluetooth, and just making sure everyone knows that he's got a cell phone, I think it's really funny, and I think we all go through this. I'm just going to segue to a little thing real quick. There are these people that get technology for the very first time, and they're so blown away by their accomplishment to be able to afford such a thing and understand how it's used, that they, in public, will bring it out, make a phone call, talk to someone, try to talk a little loud so that they can try to impress everyone with how important they are. Well, I think we should go with that $8 million deal. I mean, I don't know about you. The $2 million deal wasn't big enough, And by the way, I'm going to have to be back by Sunday because my car's coming out of the shop, my BMW. At face value, we're like some obnoxious human beings. In the end, they're really just little kids from the playground. They got a new toy or a bunch of new toys, and they just want to show it to you. They just want to say, hey, I'm not a complete loser. I can maintain a job that gives me an income to a point that I can actually afford fun things. So the playground theory is going to go for character judgment, but I think it's going to also kind of map up to every single one of us, every single day. And there was a great Twilight Zone episode called Kick the Can. I can't remember if Rod Serling personally wrote it. It's one of the most brilliant episodes ever made, which is why Steven Spielberg, when they did the Twilight Zone movie in the mid-'80s, he selected that episode for himself, I believe. But the episode's about a bunch of people in an assisted living facility. They're still up and about. They can still mess around and totally take care of themselves, but they're living in a big home, playing puzzles and having fun. And through the mysteries of the Twilight Zone, a bunch of them who are still fun-loving people, and they're in their 70s and 80s, at night they turn into children and they go out and play kick the can. But one grumpy old bastard refuses to stay young inside. He lets himself die inside before he dies outside. And he can't do it. He doesn't want to do it. When he's told that he could do it, he refuses it. And that sucks. By the time it's all over, he realizes the errors of his way, and he wants to join them because all of them, by the end of this episode, I'm just going to spoil this for you. If you haven't seen a series from the early 60s, then I think it's not my fault. All of the old people that were continually pushing this guy, come on, let's do it. They run off and stay young, and they restart as children, and they just disappear into the world with all the knowledge of being 60, 70, 80 years old. And so they're going to start a life anew. And some of them, most people have couples. So everyone's got their spouse, and they're just like, they're freaking 8 through 10 years old, maybe 12 at the tops. And he realizes he blew it. He runs outside. He's playing kick the can all by himself in his 70s. And the orderlies that take care of the home are like, where is everybody? And he's just out there by himself, essentially crying that he didn't get his shit together. One of the more interesting parts of the Bible are all the passages that Christ gives about staying young on the inside. To never lose the innocence and beauty of being a child. And of course, as an adult, we rush in with our judgment and we go, yeah, kid, but that's bullshit. You got to take care of bills and life will eat you up. Yeah, you're right. One of my good friends and former bosses posted a post on Facebook about spanking children, and I believe the article, I was just moving very quickly, I believe the article was about how, spanking is bad. I'm pretty sure I got the count right. My dad spanked me 6 times. He's a big dude, and he was always like a UPS guy or a truck driver or something, so military. So he didn't need a belt. He didn't need anything. He just had a big-ass hand, and, he was very rare. It happened. Again, I've talked about twice in one of their previous episodes where he kind of fouled it up, but whatever. Being a parent today, I know how fast you can screw things up, but nothing, again, he wasn't crazy abusive, I didn't bleed. But I have to say, I'm very proud of the fact that I got spanked when I was a little bastard, because boy, did that change my mental chemistry about what's allowed and what's not allowed. And in this, I just posted a little reply, and I said, I'm very proud of the fact that I got spanked, because I only got spanked 6 times. I'm pretty sure. And life spanks a lot harder, doesn't it? Now, I've got very close friends of mine that were beaten by their parents, beaten by their fathers. And I'm not talking about that. Alcoholic parents. That's a tough one. That is not what we're talking about. I think I spanked my daughter twice. That's all she ever needed. And twice where I think it may have caused her a little sting, I always would kind of pop her diaper every once in a while, and I talk about that in my parenting episode, that when you pop a diaper, the fun thing is it doesn't hurt them at all. It's just a little disapproval. Then you give them a big hug. You tell them what they did wrong, and you give them a big hug, and you just kind of like saying, "Oh, we don't do that." You went over the edge of caution, like I said, don't, and then you gotta go pop, wake up, because you're gonna hurt yourself. I'm here to protect you. But this playground thing has been on my mind my whole life. Like, as I meet people in boardrooms, as I meet people in restaurants or whatever, I map them to people that I knew in grade school. Now, I honestly, and I guess I should clarify, the playground, I'm talking about the recess, the time you have between classes. Obviously, there are no more recesses in America after 7th grade. Now, middle school in America has been adjusted such that 6th graders go into middle school, which I actually totally agree with that. I do not agree with 9th graders going into high school, because you're just simply too physically small in 9th grade to be hanging out with seniors, because there's a lot of courses, especially physical education, where you might play dodgeball with some guy benching 280 pounds and you barely weigh 110. I was much bigger for my age. Like, I almost got to this size at 14. So I was never having a gigantic problem, but I saw some scrawny dudes getting fucking destroyed in school. And that had to have destroyed who they were. It was like a 50-50 chance, probably less than a 50-50 chance that they were to bounce out of being severely bruised and destroyed by a fucking volleyball coming at them at, 95 miles an hour. I'm just saying volleyball and dodgeball because we used all the balls, right? That volleyball one, man, it should have never been allowed in dodgeball, because the red ones, they're kind of smushy, but a volleyball is leather and it will leave a mark, right? The other thing I want to just stress about this playground thing is that there's a war on for your children's brains going on right now. The globalists, the liberals, a lot of Democrats. I hate to even mention a political party. I hate to do it. There are liberals and there are Democrats, and they're two different things, okay? But people get lured into this bullshit. You're essentially not supposed to raise your child, but you're supposed to invade their body with a bunch of vaccines and medicine, aren't you? These kids have no choice, and you're sticking them with stuff that they will biologically carry until the day they die. It's nuts. But they want to infect your kids' brains early, make them question everything about who they are. Like, they want your kid to be existential about their gender before they have a chance to just live, just be. It's almost as if, just coming from the Midwest, I was born in Germany. Came here when I was about 3.5, I guess, or 2.5, or some bullshit. I can't remember. And I definitely remember being 3 in America. But I lived in this tiny, beautiful town, Chanute, Kansas. Chanute, Kansas. Okay, it's where Google Maps has a big plaque on the bottom, on the center of Main Street in Lincoln. I was beautifully quarantined into this world with both my grandparents living in the same town, like literally like 2 blocks from each other. Eventually, my aunts and my uncles all lived there, from both sides of the family. I lived in town at several different locations. I lived out of town in one location. So I got the country side of it, and I got the city side of it, all at once. Great schools, great teachers. But I only got to go there until I was about 8 years old. So I think about 3 to 8. The nice thing is that's where my mind started to really form. I had comfort. I had a town that my brain could conceive of, a township, a 6-mile square. Everything was meat and potatoes, boys and girls, husband and wife. There were none of these liberal agendas coming in from Europe, destroying my perception of the world, making me question a bunch of things about myself. And for the most part, the first 2/3 of my playground era was completed in that little town. Now, the only playground in that town that I really remember is when I moved out to the country. I went to this school called Fairfield. Little dinky building. I mean, if you took like an average home, I bet this school must have been 5,000 square feet. The backyard was like a giant backyard, like 3 or 4 large backyards put together. And there wasn't really a hell of a lot you could do. I think there was a swing set, there was maybe a jungle gym or some shit like that. But there are so many memories from that little tiny place. I went from half of first grade to all of second grade and then half of third grade out there. This is where I had my motorcycle. It's where I just roamed the country at 8 years old. Parents just said, go, take it, see you, come back before dinner. So I had the freedom and autonomy and the trust from my parents. I could do anything I wanted constantly. It's where I discovered girls way further than I should have at 7 years old. But I remember the dynamics that I remember from this playground, and I'm hoping that while I'm talking, you guys are having your own recollections of your playgrounds and anything significant that you learned in a playground that changed your life, that helped you. Perhaps even one that damaged you. Put it in the comments section for me so we can compare notes. Because I would like to further this theory after this episode, but I probably won't make an episode 2 of Playground Right. This is where I first, I had the girl that I actually really got to know was my neighbor. And the bizarre thing was I don't remember her going to school with me. And she was about, about a year younger than me. But when I went to school, at this particular school, there was girls all the way up to 6th grade. And I just remember a couple, one really pretty girl who was very proper. She had brothers way older than us, and so there was nothing that we could do to shake her up. And she was older than us and bigger than us, remember, because in grade school, you could see what grade someone's in just by measuring how tall they are. It's a different world. It's a very interesting class structure due to age. And I remember looking at this girl, I don't even know who she was, and just thinking, wow, she's really pretty, but she's no nonsense girl. I could tell she was a farm girl because we're all living out in the country. And then there was the ball baby, this kid, because everyone else was just average and normal, just like me. There was this kid that no matter what happened to this kid, he would fall down on the ground and cry. And he would cry so profusely that, he's one of these kids that had a lot of saliva and milk in his mouth. It's like when he cried, you just geez, dude, shut your mouth, man. Gross. And I remember just staring at this kid as a child myself and just looking at him going, what the fuck is your problem, right? Because in my house with my dad, if you cried, my dad would mock cry right in front of you. So if you're like crying, he would do it if you protest cry, not if you're hurt cry. If you're just making it up, you're just being a pain in the ass, he'd just start blubbering himself. 6'3" guy starting to just make fun of you, basically. At first I hated it, but he just showed me how ridiculous I looked, because a child protest crying looks ridiculous, don't they? And it just wiped it out of me. It was strange. My mom hated it. My mom was always yelling at him, stop that, stop that. And for a boy, it works. At least worked for me. I was pretty resilient little kid, but I mean, I guess some kids cower down. It's really strange. Not many. So that kid who was sort of the ball baby, obviously he grew up. He doesn't sit around crying today. I'm not exactly sure where he is. I don't remember him coming to any of our reunions. So go figure. Again, 9 times out of 10, the people who don't go back to reunions are projecting their own issues. Oh, I hated everybody at school. Well, maybe you were the asshole, right? Maybe what you need to do is to go so you can cleanse yourself of all your psychoses when you were a little kid. Just maybe. Some people are persecuted. I am very good friends with many of them from my high school who are persecuted. But they're very tough to find, right? Because they disappear. At that school, I also had to take the bus home. And I was a latchkey kid, Go inside the house, turn around, get in the garage, go get this key that's in the middle of like nowhere in the garage, unlock the door, put it back, go inside, eat, and watch Tom and Jerry until the parents get home. Chill out. Oddly enough, I couldn't take my motorcycle out to the middle of the wilderness unless my parents were home, which makes no sense because I would crash and burn like 5 miles away if that was the case. It wouldn't matter. But during one of the bus rides home, I learned another lesson. For some fucking reason, the bus driver picked up this high school kid. And we didn't have a high school, like some of the farm towns have, like Fredonia, this town called Fredonia, they have K through 12 all in one kind of facility. I always wanted to know what that looked like. But they pick up this absolute degenerate on this bus. And he is with a bunch of little kids. And he is unable to kind of figure out he's with a bunch of little kids. And everyone's making fun of the guy for something, and I can't remember what it was. And I jumped on the bandwagon at the last second, and we were saying something to him. He had a full beard. Today it would look like just an average homeless white guy. But he comes over to me in the bus, and no one's sitting next to me. And he puts his hand on the top of my head, and he tries to crush my neck. He literally, in any other police situation, this would be breaking a child's neck. And he pushed and he turned and my neck went pop. And I felt weird for days. And the bus driver pulled over immediately, grabbed this guy and threw him off the bus. Had I been smarter, I would have told my parents what happened so I could get checked out. But what was very interesting about that was that I'd never had anyone really sort of put their hands on me in any other way than a spanking, right? A spanking is just so... But at that point, I learned something because I had an adult-level character attack me. And really cracked the shit out of my neck. I mean, it was like... It was bad. I can still feel it to this day. Like, I can just hear the crack in my head and kind of that weird tingling sensation when your nerves kind of even make your nose feel like you went underwater simply because you've been injured so bad. Weird. But you start to learn, okay, there's people bigger than you. Better watch your mouth. Shouldn't have said anything. That's what I learned. He didn't deserve to have that said to him. I'm just being a dick. I'm just jumping on the bandwagon. And I paid the consequence for it, right? So I'm this little kid and I have this motorcycle. And I lived on a circle out in the country. For those of you who've lived on circles in countries, you know exactly what they are. But just imagine sort of a round rectangle with a bunch of houses on the inside and a bunch of houses on the outside. It's a gravel road. And there must have been like 8 kids combined that lived out there, about my age or older. And there was a very interesting thing that I learned with this motorcycle. If any of you have seen the movie Zeitgeist, I actually went down to the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood and saw it for like probably the 10th time in person with the old man. It's at the end of the film. But this film is divided into 4 pieces, and the last piece is all about living in some sort of utopia without any money. Because this old guy, I think his name is Jacques, he went to a remote island in the Pacific, and he shows up with a bunch of beads in a bag because he's told they don't have any monetary units of any kind. And so he just thought, well, I'll trade these beads. And so he shows up, they point him to a hut. He puts the stuff in the hut, he goes down for the day and starts roaming around meeting the people, and he comes up and he finds out that the chief and some of his minions are sorting through his beads, and they're dividing them up. And he's like, what are you doing? This is my stuff. And they said, you have too many. And that's when he had an epiphany, a eureka moment that you don't covet, you distribute, and then everyone is even and everyone is happy. There are no haves and have-nots. The chief made sure that no one found out that this guy had more beads than everyone else. So what does that have to do with my motorcycle? Well, pretty much my average day on the motorcycle was to drive in a circle for a little while until I got bored to death. There's one dog that always chased me. But I would off-road because at the end of the circle there was this path, and you could just go and go and go. And it's just beautiful Kansas plains. We didn't have wheat fields. We had hay fields and corn fields and soybean fields. I used to go to this church that was kind of buried in the ground. It was this round church. And so the parking lot, you have to enter the church at the base level, which they dug out this scoop in front of the church. And you go in the front door, but the rest of the church is buried in soil with this like cone rooftop. And so I would use the dugout area as a ramp. And so I just hit this thing, and God, I swear to God, we must have been jumping 15, 20 feet in the air. Crazy. But one day I'm driving around, and the kids started making one of them started kind of running after me while I was driving by, and I'm like, what are you, fucking crazy? Take a little physics, kid. You're going to die here. Used to put these planks of wood out there, and I'm still not I think they're trying to make me wreck. And then eventually they made a human shield across the street. And so I stop. I almost wrecked my bike doing it. I'm like, what is your problem? What the hell are you doing? And they said, we want to ride your bike. And then, of course, what they don't understand, they have-nots, did not understand, they don't know how to ride a motorcycle. They don't know how to get into first gear. They don't know how to brake. They don't know anything about it. But they want to ride on it. They never did, of course. The only one who ever rode it was my aunt, and she crashed it in like fucking 300 feet, and destroyed my my gear shifting pedal, of course. That's what would have happened had these kids ridden it. But it was interesting. I got to see the inside of their brain, their protest. We want what you have. And we don't care if we're qualified to have it. That's the disease of this fucking era, man. These kids who just want everything, but they don't want to get any talent whatsoever. They think if they imitate talent, they've got the real talent. They play Guitar Hero a lot. Man, they're Yngwie Malmsteen or Buckethead, right? Give me a break. They think if they can tell someone else's joke, they're a comedian and a writer. I mean, it's just like, wow. And their parents are just as delusional as they are. Unbelievable. You just can't even help them. You can't even open your mouth with any lucidity, otherwise they'll come after you. But we pick up and we move to Newtown. And this is, I'm a little fish out of water. I'm going half into third grade, like right in the middle of the year. Was getting good at this. And the playground always has to do with the kids that don't know you because they don't have class with you, and then the kids that know you. The kids that know you are usually pretty cool. This is the town where my parents divorced. So we show up and we're living in a house together, and then we live in apartments separated. But I'm going to school, and there's just a few very interesting things where you start to get taught about the haves and the have-nots. Now, I felt really privileged with my motorcycle because I had something I personally loved, and I found it kind of disturbing that kids wanted to ride it and didn't have one. That was kind of weird. When I got to this other town, though, I couldn't keep my bike for that long. They had to take it away from me, and so I didn't ride again until I was a teenager. I had this really awesome bike that got taken away. Police were chasing me at one point. It's really funny. And then my dad got me a bicycle. Now, I had a bicycle as well back when I had my motorcycle, but I just didn't ride it. But my dad bought me this Huffy bike from Walmart. And I was so excited. Oh my God, man. It just was awesome. But I drove it around town, and one of the kids said, "Oh, you got a Huffy? That's a piece of shit. You probably got that from Walmart, didn't you?" I'm like, "Yeah." I don't know if it was Walmart. It was something like that. And all of a sudden, I didn't like my bike because this kid said it wasn't good. And so, lesson learned, right? I fell prey to some system that someone else had in their brain. And all of a sudden, I had this weird sort of downgrade in my head. Jesus, I was the really cool kid with the motorcycle, and now I've got a piece of shit bike. I kind of like this bike, but he says it's no good. We did get it at a cheap place, and, I'm like 9 trying to process all this information, right? But in that particular area, what I learned was 2 different things at the playground. And I'm going to split this in half. The approach to school was a walk to school. That's probably about a mile away, tops. No bus. No big deal. I had a buddy named Jim. He and I were good friends and just totally, hung out all the time, walked to school. Didn't have any classes together. But we'd find each other afterwards, walk home, that kind of thing. But then we had this other kid, Charles. Little scrawny kid. His brothers, sisters were heavy into weed, the brown weed back in the day. Got a lot of wild experiences over at their house. But Charles got this thing up his ass that he couldn't have anyone else be friends with his friend, Jim. And it's that three's a crowd sort of thing, right? I could give a shit, right? But I remember walking to school one day, and this kid starts, and we're like 9, 10 years old, but he starts, attacking me. Grabbing my coat, throwing me around. He's this little kid. And I'm like, it's almost like, a pit bull that gets with a little puppy. You just, even if the puppy's biting your tail and hurting you, you're just like, oh, that's cute. So this kid was so tiny and so scrawny, I'm kind of like just trying to push him away from me, like, hey, dude, you're really small. You should probably just chill out here. Only happened once. We got in a fight later that day, physically. It calmed down after that, 100%. I clipped him in his chin. I didn't get full impact, but I clipped him in his chin, and I think he felt his head go, oh shit, I almost passed out. And then he was like, I just don't like you, man. One of those real bad 9-year-old brawls, right? But then on the playground proper, this is where I met some farm boys who played soccer a little bit differently, like I said. And it was very interesting. It was sort of that survival of the fittest that every animal and every child has understood since the beginning of time, since way before Darwin the hack came in with his giant obvious epiphany, his Captain Obvious epiphany here. But I remember playing soccer. We had, it was weird. We had like Pele came through and touched everyone. Then his coach came through and touched all the schools. And he just we didn't know we're meeting legends, It's kind of funny. And so we suck. We're just playing it. But I remember I got pretty good and we're down at the goal and I'm just trying to maneuver it away from this kid. And this kid can't get the ball away from me. So he just slugs me in the fucking head, right in my temple. He was taller than me, is more scrawny, but, scrawny kids can punch really fucking hard as long as they pull it really fast, right? And he hits me in the head. I'm sort of disoriented. I'm looking up at him like, like, hey, this is football. Like, this is soccer. You don't use your hands, dude. You especially don't punch anybody. But it kind of disoriented me. He got the ball away from me. And then it was on. And the kid just happened to rent an apartment just below me. And he had a younger brother who was younger than both of us. But for a little bit, he dominated me, and in his own brain, he dominated me. He'd walk up to me and he'd do one of those tall things where he would, look down on you. And so it took a little while for us to educate him that we could do the same exact thing. But soccer became this sort of boxing soccer. It was really fun. And eventually we all got in trouble, and it had to end after about a week of that shit. But it was a very interesting process of some people will cheat and do whatever they can, especially if no one's looking, right? You bump into these people in life. I've had partners recently who do this kind of stuff. They don't care. It's just do whatever you can to get ahead. Fuck the other guy. Break the rules. Cheat. And what's funny is they break all the rules everywhere else in life too. We have carpool lanes here in Los Angeles. They'll just drive on them, just because it's late at night. I got tinted windows, no one can see. And in the end, it's not the end of the world, but at one point you're like, wow, you're showing your character flaw. What else do you do? In business especially, that's just exactly like this, right? But now here's the other thing that you'll learn for those of you who move around. And I know that some of you have had really tough childhoods. I mean, and I'm not trying to paint anything tough. Trust me. You guys have had tough... I got buddies here in Huntington Beach that grew up in East LA and South Central gangs, and they tell me about their childhood. And let me tell you, man, I'm telling you about a Walt Disney movie, and they're telling me about a Clive Barker movie, right? It doesn't matter if you had a cakewalk or if you had a horrible thing. You learn lessons in the playground that you keep your whole life. You learn archetypes of human beings that you keep your whole life. And I'm willing to bet that the tougher you had it, the more you learned. But I think it's interesting that the point of this episode is that I think we're all reflecting back on these lessons that we learned as a little kid. And we just don't acknowledge it. We don't acknowledge it to each other. Oh, that's the ball baby, If any of you have seen the movie Cabin in the Woods, and if you have not seen Cabin in the Woods with Chris Hemsworth and company, it is an absolutely brilliant, brilliant sci-fi horror movie that is, if any of you, and it's funny, it's a comedy, but there are some archetypes that always go with those cabin movies, those horror movies where everyone goes out to the cabin. There's the jock, there's the nerd, there's the virgin, those different archetypes that are in the film. That movie takes a really strong advantage of those different archetypes. And this is what we learn in grade school. And of course, in high school, just to jump ahead for a split second, you have if you've seen Not Another Teen Movie, absolutely brilliant parody on all the 80s movies that were ever made. That movie opens up with this kid who's sort of the guide to the high school, and he says, oh, all you new kids here, welcome. He goes, here at so-and-so high, we don't have any cliques. We're all together, whatever. And then he goes, okay, jocks, you come with me. Nerds, you go over there. And he splits everyone up into the cliques that he just said doesn't actually occur. It's just utterly brilliant, right? So I think it's funny that the experiences that we have in grade school tend to help us figure out which groups of people we are going to be allowed to hang out in, and then the ones that we pick to be in. Obviously, some people have privileges they can pick, but if you could pick the jocks, they usually do pick the jocks. They don't say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to perceive myself in the mirror every morning as being a dick who's got to hang out with his cliquey buddies, right? But then I went to Massachusetts. I am a fish out of water. I'm not Jewish and I'm not Irish, so I do not blend in. I've said this I've explained this era of my life a couple of times in episodes. The kids that I got along with all the kids pretty much. The Irish always wanted to fight. Believe it or not, the Fighting Irish. I mean, it's just crazy. They want to be your best friend, but they also want to fisticuff after school. It's kind of funny. And we're all little kids, right? So it's not a not a bloodbath. It's not Fight Club. But after about a year of being there, I was there for a couple of years. I found myself really comfortable with the black kids because they were not so great in number. And they're all just kind of looking around like, are these people crazy? They're crazy, right? You're white. Aren't all these other white people crazy? And I'm like, yes, they're crazy. They're weird for wanting to do what they do. But the Massachusetts school system is really strange. And I've described this once before. If you then, again, I'm not going to get deeply political here, but Charlotte Iserby, the one who wrote The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, was in New England when it all went down. And I can now reflect on my past and say, oh my God, I was seeing it actually happen in the early 80s. But they actually divided the school according to your achievement test results. And they had A, B, C, and D groups. Your A group was your smartest group. And they divided us up in a cafeteria so we could all see each other in these groups. B and C were the same. I was in B, I think. But B and C were the same. We were kind of the middle of the road. And then D, well, they were the ones that got the Ds. They were the less fortunate or whatever. And so you would see how we're all divided up. And so then we're all clicking in our brain, oh, those are the smart kids. And, smart kids, it just so happened, dressed better, got picked up by the BMWs and the Mercedes. It was like interesting. The D kids have to walk home. I had to walk home. But it was just interesting how that got all split up. But the playground there was very interesting. Even though we were all split up, the only group that really didn't integrate well was the A group. But B through D, we didn't care about any of that crap. We weren't the special ones, so we all kind of clicked together. And I remember the camaraderie of the group, and then we went off to middle school, which was 7th grade. And the same group of kids came over, and then we added a bunch more because the school is a lot bigger from other grade schools. And I was very fortunate. I mean, I was an artist, and the school recognized that, and so I got a lot of out-of-class time to do art projects all around the school, paint the windows for Christmas, and do a bunch of, sports art for the gymnasium and a bunch of stuff. So, no one, but the funny thing was no one really knew, besides a couple of the art students, that we were in this group. So there wasn't any envious nature towards us because people were just like, where is he? I don't know. He's not here. He's sick or whatever. But no one was like, ooh, he got personal time away from class. Looking back, I'm very happy. But what starts happening in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, the hormones start heating up, right? You're no longer just looking at that girl going, Now, before I'd left Kansas, that started happening in 5th grade. My friends forced me into my first kiss with my girlfriend. Here we are, boyfriend, girlfriend, and we hadn't even kissed, and we had to do it in front of everyone else. And then they were like, do a French kiss. We were like, what is that? We didn't even know. And they were like, you put your tongues in each other's. And I was like, oh, she had bad breath too. Pretty girl. Probably I did too. So we weren't really drawn to it after we did it. But there was a girl, her name was Betsy. And I had a crush on her very quickly in 6th grade. But she wasn't really paying attention to me much. She was playing hard to get, literally. But I was always paying attention to her. Oh, I thought she was so pretty. And then I gave up. I was like, okay, she doesn't want to date me. That's cool. And I remember being at home. My dad and I were fixing a pinball machine. We used to fix and, just rotate them through the house constantly. It's one of the days I think it was literally the day I reached up to pick, I had the phone in my hand, I'm talking, she called me. I don't even know how the hell she got my number. And I reached up into the pinball machine to pull myself up from underneath it, and I grabbed the power transformer and shocked the living shit out of myself, which was pretty funny. But now she wants to date me. And for some reason, I remember hesitating to date her. And then she got angry. And she was like, you are going to date me. This is just the way it is. And if you don't date me, I'll have my friend's brother beat you up. I remember that was part of the conversation. I was like, damn. I don't know why I resisted. I still had a crush on her. I wasn't dating anybody else. It was interesting. Dating. Freaking 11, 12 years old, right? Sounds funny, doesn't it? sounds funny that you can have all these intense experiences between the age of like 5 and 13. And I think as parents, we forget that these kids that we have are having these intense experiences, and it's very meaningful and it's very formative. It's intimidating at times. And we need to understand that they live a complete 90210 at those young ages, and so did we. Now, sadly, the amount of people, the amount of adults that I run into in their 40s now who say they can't remember their childhood is astonishing. I've never been 48 before. I don't know. I've never had a bunch of friends in their 40s before. So, I don't know. Is this a trend that by the time you're 40, you're so toxified in the brain you don't remember anything? And then you'll meet, my neighbor across the street. She can remember everything. She remembers 2 years old and up, like I do. She told her mom how the house was laid out at 2, I guess, at one point, and her mom's job was on the ground, right? But think about it. Just to segue for a second. When we as parents think about our kids going to school, and we're busy with our lives, depending on how old you are when you have your kids, you're in your 20s, you're in your 30s, and your kids getting into, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. We think that they're just going there to learn stuff. And if they come home with any personal experiences, we're like, it just goes over our head, like, whatever. Study your work, study your school. Meanwhile, your child is being utterly molded by the other kids. They're being molded by the teachers who are now being taught in America to infiltrate kids' brains, There's some article that came out yesterday that a bunch of teachers told their kids to write letters to their senators demanding that the Second Amendment be removed. There should be jail time for those teachers, right? It's the same liberal that would say, the Bible shouldn't be even mentioned in school. Oh, but destroy the Bill of Rights. The thing that gives these teachers the right to be gigantic fucking pussies. That's what I think is always interesting. A Second Amendment hater has never fired a gun and is generally a pussy. And they want to get rid of the bullies. They think if they get rid of guns, the bullies disappear. It's like, let me tell you, man, in my hometown, the best fights I've ever seen with adults beating the shit out of each other in the middle of the fucking night, in the middle of Main Street. I told the story. I was running the movie theater at like 13 years old. It's real late at night. The place is closed. I've already called in the tickets and all this other stuff. Out from the bar across the street comes this dude running. And he's in his boots. He's a total cowboy. And then 2 seconds later, another guy comes out, runs faster, grabs him, pins him down right in the middle of Main Street. We just happened to have, how the lights rotate off and on. Our area was totally dark, and he is just pounding this guy's face. He's got the guy pinned down, and he's just pounding him in the face, and this guy's screaming for mercy. And you see that as a child, and you're like, whoa, I guess that guy pissed off the other dude, and one should be careful, because a fist can kill somebody. It's interesting. You learn that in the playground too, right? Life comes with tons of lessons, doesn't it? I'm making this episode for a couple reasons, maybe more than 2 reasons. But the first charter of this episode is so that we can recap where we formed our opinions about all things. I want you to think about, if you can remember your childhood, how much, even before, you got into kindergarten, how much of messing around in the backyard taught you something. Like I mentioned a few episodes ago, 2 of my ended up real good friends said hi to me by walking up to me in the backyard and taking the hose out of my hand that I was using to water this garden my mom was doing, and they just put it in my pants. It's hot summer. It's actually kind of nice. But I'm looking at this kid, and I'm thinking, is this funny? And they were laughing. I was like, I'm playing in the water. I'm already soaked. So, like, what? How is this? It's almost like taking a hose and putting it on someone in a bathing suit and going, ha ha, I made you get wet. And you're just like, okay, I guess you're 4, But it's that dynamic of just figuring out how people's minds think, We are always talking about when we're young, we have this primal innocence, these primal thoughts. And the notion that somehow these primal thoughts get disposed of as you get older, I think, is probably a little bit of wishful thinking. When you grow up in a tiny little town and you know everyone from childhood up, the reclusive kids stay reclusive. The outgoing kids usually stay pretty outgoing unless some traumatic event occurs. I mentioned a family member of mine. He was known as just this crazy kid. He was always causing a lot of property damage as a kid. He was always hanging out with the wrong crowd, like building like little tiny shacks would burn down. He's always there. You know, he got caught shoplifting, and yours truly shoplifted his ass off, but not till later. But then, you know, as he was, I think, about 15 years old, he's having an argument with his mom. His mom punches him in the head after he turned around, popped him in his temple. He came to my house and he was crying, and I've never seen this kid cry before. And that day she cut his balls off because he was meek from that point on. It so shook him to his core that even though he eventually got a girlfriend once, and then he finally got a second girlfriend, married her, and had kids, he's a meek human being. But he pretends to be otherwise. But we, in a small little town, know, yeah, that's him. He's harmless. Most he'll ever do is take some medication for being depressed and kill somebody or himself. There's nothing more precious than a young mind, you know. When I became a teacher, or an instructor, I should say, because I've never been a teacher like full time, right? I never went to a university or some school as a full-time job. I've just been teaching courses probably since my early 20s, because I would always know, I would always pioneer something or go get information from very brilliant people, and then I would have this coveted piece of information, then I would be part of the corporate training wherever I worked. Or my employees didn't know it and I wanted to teach them. But I was told very early on that one of the biggest responsibilities you have is teaching children. And someone told me it told me it in a way that was something like, I can't think of how they said it, but I said it the other day, the way it was initially taught to me, but it was something like that saying that says, you know, it's harder for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get into heaven, sort of thing. And it was sort of under this tense to say that if you teach a child, you're toying with your eternal damnation in some way or another, right? It was basically because you could teach a kid wrong, and then you've changed their perception of the world forever. And unless you have access to them at a future point, and they still respect you, they may not hear any different. Which is why I think that all these agendas in America, teaching kids all this crap science and turning crap science into crap politics, is blasphemous against humanity. Talk about do no harm. It's doing pure harm, right? Teaching kids about climate change and that horse shit, right? Teaching them to hate the very foundation of this country. Hey, if America is so fucked up, then why does everybody want to move here? But people want to come here and undo what we are. It's insane. Convincing our own native indigenous citizens to spite the foundation that gave them the ability to be autonomous and powerful and have the American dream. Wow. It's pretty intense, isn't it? Isn't that just ignorant as hell? I have been in meetings with very old men who, despite their morals, are smart, and they will reference the playground. They won't say the word playground, but they'll reference, well, you know, it's that kind of guy, and it's that guy, it's that kind of girl, ba ba ba. And they're just mentioning an archetype that most of us learned and met on the playground. I mean, I know you get this. So, one thing I want to send you off in terms of homework for your brain is to analyze what may have taught you one way or the other when you were a kid to behave a certain way. And then it's always what we say on the show is, look, make sure that's something that you still value. You might also rewind and say, what did I learn correctly as a kid on the playground that I no longer engage in today? I've let society make me cynical. It's important. it's really important to take inventory of these things because I think there's a lot of brilliance there. You know, I think the Bible was written by very inspired men where it's good, very devious men where it is very manipulative. But the parts they got right mention this algorithm of childhood. And I think that was a stroke of absolute brilliance. If it's truly God coming down and becoming man, well, there you go. If you believe that, then you should believe this even more so. I think it's also interesting to think about the fact that some of the most simple, fundamental things we learn as human beings are the cornerstone of our absolute success in this world. If you have children or grandchildren, that is why it is so important to protect their environment. When I grew up in the Midwest, I knew that pretty much wherever a kid grew up, they were safe. Yeah, sure, one town's going to be a little more racist than the other, although Kansas is pretty agnostic. We borrow the good things from the north, and then we borrow the good things from the south, and we leave all the bullshit out. A lot of special people in that central band. But yeah, you're going to be closed-minded here, closed-minded there. But I didn't worry about, kids getting shot, kids getting into too many drugs, kids getting oversexed. It's probably different today, as the Midwest seems to emulate L.A. like we're still doing the gang wars. I just recently went to Texas, and wow, they are still pretending to be L.A. Even San Francisco is still pretending to be L.A. It's just nuts. We're done with it because we did it for 20 years, and we did it at an extreme level. I think we only really did it for about 10 years, maybe 15 tops. And then the drug dealers got tired of dying, and the cops got tired of fighting it, and everyone just kind of said, aren't you tired of this? And everyone went, yeah. All right, well, hey, good luck, I talked to 2 retired 30-year LAPD cops, and they said it's over. He says, we'll do a traffic stop, and we'll literally do a traffic stop, and the guy in the car is one of the most notorious drug dealers of L.A., and he said the guy's out of the business. They laugh it off. They have little good stories, and they'll even let the guy go. Because they're like, you were in the machine, and you survived, and we did too. Congratulations. Enjoy your night. How cool is that, right? But when I see families have kids in really bad neighborhoods, it's usually because either they feel trapped and they can't get out, which you always can, usually. No matter what race you are, no matter what gender you are, you can get out and go to a better place. Or the parents are so stuck on their jobs. They think they've externalized their value in a job and said, I am nothing unless I have this big, high-powered job. My kid's going to grow up in sort of could be even a nice area, but, the nice area is kind of sandwiched in really bad areas, and so the kids are going to go through all this crazy hell they shouldn't. Huntington Beach, California, you've got 2 high schools here. One of the high schools that's in this district is supposedly one of the better high schools in the entire area. But the rich-looking school down the street, that's a beautiful fucking school, man. Everyone always tells me every kid that goes there turns into a massive drug addict. It has tons of problems. Now, I'm just repeating what I've been told, but I've been told this by at least a dozen people over the last 15 years. And especially the kids telling me this. So it matters. When your kids go to school, they're having these intense experiences, no matter how young they are. That's why it's important to talk to them. How was your day, son? How was your day, daughter? Get to know their lives, right? Compare your lessons that you learned. If your kid gets heartbroken, think back to your heartbroken days and try to get through it. Try to understand it. They're little adults, believe it or not. Because, there's that old saying, as it is above, so too it is below. And we use this to understand physics and how the universe works. But it works at an adult level too. The shit you're dealing with at your level, it's the same stuff your kid's dealing with at their level. It's just, and it means the same. It means the same to a child. Yeah, I told you about the kid in soccer. He liked to box while he played. I can still remember, just like it happened 2 minutes ago, getting boxed in the head while I was looking down at the ball. And I remember looking up at the kid thinking, hey, this isn't fair. This isn't the way this works. You're breaking the rules. You're being a dick. And the funny thing is, I've had that, 50 times as an adult. Same exact thing. The guys that cheat to get ahead. And as long as the teacher didn't see it, no one will ever know they cheated. Right? And it happens in all kinds of ways. It doesn't happen in a physical way when you get older, typically. It'll happen in a business maneuver. It'll happen in someone lying about their career. I've had a good friend of mine reveal the fact that he's been lying about his career his whole life. Now, he's an amazing individual. If he would just go with what he actually did, he's amazing by what he really did. But he tends to over-exaggerate everything to a level of almost hysteria. I mean, it's laughable, the things this guy said he did, as if no one else was in the room the whole time. It's interesting. It's like the guy that comes over your house and helps paint like a 1-foot square on the side of your house, but then he'll tell his friends, oh yeah, I painted that house. Oh, you did? I don't remember seeing you on the construction site. Oh yeah, totally. And they will have observantly watched what everyone else was doing, and so they'll say, oh yeah, we had this problem with the cabinets in the kitchen. Remember that problem? They didn't deal with it. They just came and looked at it. And then they told that story. Oh, yeah, I heard there were cabinet problems. Oh, yeah, you must have done the cabinet because you know about that problem. Anyway, you feel me. The moral of the story is that everything matters. Protect your children's brains because it matters. Go back and take inventory of everything that you learned that was good, everything you learned that was bad. Find out how you're applying that to your current life. Because you are, for sure. The playground was a very powerful place for most of us, right? If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. There's audio, video, a locked Facebook group, and Patreon page for those who want to support. I've got 7 Patreon people. Just for the Patreon folks, I've been posting, early releases to these videos at least 2/3 of the time. No one is watching them I'll put it up for 2 days before anyone gets a chance to see it on the YouTube channel or in the podcast, and no one's watching it. So if you can hear my voice and you're contributing, definitely turn your little notification on at Patreon. Otherwise, you're not going to get any benefits for your donation. Not that, I guess most of you don't care. You're just like, hey man, I want to give you some scratch at the end of the month. Super appreciate it. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.